So you're telling me that Latinx is actually a relatively new term, even though it feels like it's been around forever?
That's right. It really started gaining traction in the late 90s and early 2000s, especially within queer communities in Latin America and the US. It was a way to acknowledge the gender-neutral aspect of the term and to connect with indigenous roots.
That makes sense. It's about listening and understanding, rather than imposing our own ideas about what's right or wrong.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected, and that's a goal worth striving for, regardless of the specific term we use.
I think it's also important to acknowledge the historical context of these terms. Hispanic, for example, was coined by the federal government, and it carries a certain weight, both positive and negative.
You're right. It's important to understand the history and the baggage that comes with each term. Hispanic can feel like a broad, even impersonal label for some people, while others find it empowering and a source of pride.
And then there's Chicano, which has a very specific history and meaning within the Mexican-American community.
Yes, Chicano is a powerful term that emerged during the civil rights era. It represents a sense of cultural identity and resistance, and it's deeply rooted in the history of Mexican Americans.
It's amazing how language can be used to express so much about identity, history, and culture. It's a constant process of evolution and negotiation.
Absolutely. And it's a process that's ongoing. As the Latinx community continues to grow and evolve, so too will the language we use to describe ourselves.
I think it's important to be open to that evolution and to embrace the diversity of experiences within the Latinx community.
I agree. It's about celebrating the richness and complexity of our shared heritage and recognizing that there's no single way to be Latinx.
Interesting. And what about Latine? It seems like that's gaining popularity too, but it's not as widely known as Latinx. So, what do you think the future holds for these terms? Will Latinx or Latine become the dominant terms, or will we see even more diversity in the way people identify?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think it's likely that we'll see continued evolution and a greater emphasis on individual choice and self-identification. The important thing is to create a space where everyone feels comfortable and respected, regardless of the term they use.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating a sense of belonging and community, where everyone feels like they have a voice and a place.
Exactly. And that's a goal worth striving for, no matter what language we use. That's true. Latine is a more recent development, and it's gaining traction among Spanish speakers who prefer a more grammatically accurate gender-neutral term. It's a bit more nuanced, and it reflects the linguistic diversity within the Latinx community.
It's fascinating how language evolves to reflect changing social and cultural dynamics. But it also seems like there's a lot of debate about which term is best, or even if there should be a single term at all.
Absolutely. The Latinx community is incredibly diverse, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to identity. Some people feel strongly about Latinx, others prefer Latine, and many still identify as Latino or Hispanic. It's all about personal preference and what feels most authentic.
I can see how that could lead to confusion and even conflict. It's like trying to find a single word to encompass the entire spectrum of human experience.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that language is constantly evolving. What might be considered inclusive today could be outdated tomorrow. The key is to be respectful of individual preferences and to avoid imposing a single term on the entire community.
So, what's the best way to navigate this complex landscape of terms? Should we just avoid using any of them altogether?
I wouldn't say that. It's important to be aware of the different terms and their nuances, but ultimately it's about being respectful and mindful of the individual. If you're unsure, it's always best to ask someone how they prefer to be identified.